Well, if you have a copy of the scriptures, I invite you to join me in the Gospel of John, chapter 2. John, chapter 2. We're going to be reading just the first 11 verses. If you need a Bible, you can raise your hand. Mark will be around. You can borrow this Bible for the service. If you need a Bible, you can take it home. The text will also be on the screen behind me. But here we are, John, chapter 2, starting in verse 1. Hear the word of the Lord. On the third day, there was a wedding at Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus also was invited to the wedding with his disciples. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now there were 6 stone water jars there for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." And they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the feast." So they took it. And when the master of the feast tasted the water now become wine, and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the master of the feast called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and when people have drunk freely, then the poor wine. But you have kept the good wine until now." This, the first of his signs, Jesus did at Cana in Galilee, and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. This is the word of God for the people of God. So I have reached the stage of my life where I drink LaCroix pretty regularly. I drink sparkling water. And I'm not ashamed to confess that I drink like a LaCroix or some other brand of sparkling water almost every day. And you know, the internet is funny about the opinions of sparkling water, because some people love LaCroix. Some people love the different flavors of sparkling waters, and some people are disgusted by it. Right? There's not a whole lot of middle ground, oddly enough. Either you love it or you're disgusted by it. Either you get it or you don't. And I gotta say, you know, I'm in that demographic, I guess, that where I'm just drinking sparkling water now. This is part, and I want to drink sparkling water because I get tired of drinking water. I like to drink a lot of water. I drink tea, but sometimes, you know, I just want to drink something else, something interesting with maybe a little bit of flavor. They have carbonation, things like that. But to be honest, yeah, I don't love this stuff. And I'm convinced that anyone who says that they love LaCroix, they're just lying. They're just lying. Because here's the thing about LaCroix. It's interesting. It adds a different flavor, a different dynamic, but, you know, it's not really that good. It's not bad, necessarily, but, you know, it's not really that good either. It's kind of flavorless. It's got like a hint of flavor, you know, some bubbles, and that's just kind of what it is. And even though it's not great, and even though it's not terrible, I will freely admit I drink one almost every day. It's become a habit now. I need something different to kind of to add to the end of my day with dinner or something, to have something kind of interesting. I bring this up because, sadly, I think that many people see Jesus as sort of a LaCroix. That Jesus can be just like an interesting additive to life. That people can see Jesus as, you know, not necessarily bad, but, you know, not great either. It just something you can add to your life to make it more interesting. Something, maybe Christianity is something you can add to your life to give you maybe a little sense of purpose every once in a while, or to make you feel good about yourself. You're getting healthy, and so maybe Christianity is just something you can add to your life to be healthy. Just an extra additive that can be rather bland sometimes. Now, I don't imagine that if this is the way you see Jesus now, that this isn't the way you've always seen Jesus. I imagine there was a time when you first met Jesus where, man, it was full of life and vigor, and it was beautiful and engaging and all these things. But over time, over the years, over decades, it can be easy to sort of get overly familiar with Jesus. Get overly familiar with Christianity and maybe water down some of the more difficult teachings that we find in the Gospels. Like, those words are kind of hard, Jesus. Let me just water those down or ignore them until Jesus kind of becomes a watered down, bland, unoffensive sort of just additive to your life. But what if I told you that the Jesus of the Gospels, that the true Jesus we find is not some bland, unobtrusive, sort of just, benign character of flavorless LaCroix, but what if I told you the Jesus of the Gospels was the best wine you have ever tasted? Even if you don't drink wine, it is the best beverage, the best food that you can possibly imagine, that in him is the fullness of everything. That the Jesus of the Gospels has in his hand the sweetest things of life. That every source of goodness comes from him. In him is found abundance of life. Not anything lacking, not anything bland, but as rich and flavorful and abundant in everything that is good. We're continuing our walk through the Gospel of John that we began during the Advent season and end of November through December. And we're going to stay in John all the way through Easter. And one of the primary goals of the gospel writers is to show us who Jesus is. We've seen how John has already made it a very big point right off the bat to show us that Jesus isn't just a guy. He's not just a good teacher. He's not just, any of these things. That Jesus is God himself. But he wants to be more specific than that Jesus is just God. He wants to let us know what kind of God Jesus is. That he is the God who came to give life and to give it abundantly. He is the God who came to bring joy and to bring it abundantly. That we would have peace beyond understanding, that he is the God in whom all good things are found. And the text this morning makes this point quite clearly for us. So just a bit of context here. We find Jesus beginning his public ministry, right? He's about 30 years old now. He was been raised in Nazareth, and now we saw last week, he's gone out and begun teaching, and he's calling disciples to himself. And disciples are now following him, and this is the very beginning of his ministry. And it says that here, kind of sort of in the first week of his ministry, that there was a wedding taking place in Cana of Galilee. And Jesus' mother was there. His mother was invited. Jesus and his disciples were there. They were invited to this wedding. And some scholars, kind of debate this. Some people think that Jesus and his disciples sort of crashed the wedding. And they were unexpected guests, and that's why they ran out of wine. But it's not very clear about that. It does say Jesus was there and that him and his disciples were invited to the wedding. And I think from the context, we can sort of deduce that this wasn't just a wedding of some stranger that they just happened to be passing by and got invited into the wedding. But it seemed more likely that this was some sort of maybe relative, cousin perhaps, or a friend of the family. And I think the evidence that we have here is when the wine does run out, Mary sort of takes it upon herself to do something about it, right? I mean, if you were just at a wedding of someone you barely knew, like a friend of a friend or, whatever, and something went wrong, you probably wouldn't feel the need for you to act, right? It's not your wedding. You don't know the people very well. Like, it's not your problem. But Mary, she sees a problem and she's going to do something about it, which suggests some sort of closeness, maybe not real close, but might be a niece or a nephew getting married. It might be a friend of the family. It might be a neighbor, someone that they knew, and so these are people that had some sort of familial connection, it seems, and weddings in the first century in Jewish culture were a fascinating thing, and we see kind of the wedding ideas and wedding imagery, wedding themes sort of sprinkled throughout the Gospels and sprinkled throughout the New Testament. Right? This is a metaphor that the biblical authors used a lot to describe God's relationship with his people, to describe Jesus' relationship to the church. And we'll see all this throughout the Gospel of John as well, that when Jesus later says, I go to prepare a place for you, right? That was an idea of wedding talk, where a groom and a bride would get engaged, and then the man would go and prepare a place so that when they got married, he had a place to go take his wife. We have imagery all sprinkled out of marriage and covenant relationship, to the point where in Revelation, we have kind of the ultimate marriage between Christ and the church being fulfilled. And so marriage is an important metaphor for us when we think about God, when we think about our relationship to him, when we think about how he relates to us. But marriages in this first century, they were a big deal. If we think we do weddings big here, theirs was incredibly serious and important, to the fact that even if you were engaged, that was already like a legally binding agreement. That if you were engaged to get married, you couldn't just break off an engagement. You would have to end an engagement with a certificate of divorce, right? Which is what we see with Mary and Joseph. When Joseph finds out that Mary is pregnant and he knows it's not his, they're engaged, and it says that he was going to give her a certificate of divorce, right? So even an engagement, you're already committed, right? This is it. You're essentially married. And then there was this long process of preparation, of getting things ready. We have the parable of like the bridesmaids, if you know that, with the oil lamps kind of waiting for the bridegroom to come. All this anticipation and revolving around the wedding day and the wedding feast. And the wedding feast is a big, important event at a wedding. Another metaphor we see in Scripture, this wedding feast that we are invited to. And it was the responsibility of the bridegroom and the bridegroom's family to supply the wedding feast, right? And so the fact that the wine ran out, that was not good. It was the groom's responsibility to make sure there was a feast big enough for all the guests. And he failed in his responsibility. Right, this would have been a social embarrassment to the highest degree. Right? It would have been devastating for them socially and probably financially, because if they weren't able to supply a large enough feast, that's another hint that this family was not a family of means. They didn't have a lot of money, but they were giving what they could, but it wasn't enough. And so they would have been embarrassed socially, but even more than that, there's been evidence of other texts during this time where if a bridegroom did not provide enough feast for everyone, he could get sued. He was legally obligated to provide the feast, and if he did not do an adequate enough job, he could have been liable to a lawsuit, right? This was like a complete and utter disaster. And so it is into this context that Mary says, they have no wine, right? And so Mary isn't just saying this because she's bummed because she's not going to be able to get a buzz later and have a few glasses of wine. She's like, I was really looking forward to the open bar and to relax and have fun and dance and drink wine. No, she's not saying they have no wine as sort of like, oh, this is a bummer. She's drawing our attention to the seriousness of the situation. They have no wine. This is not good. Something is very wrong in this situation. And so she tells Jesus this, her son, the son that she raised, the son that angels visited her, that she knows he's the Son of God. If anyone can do anything about the wine running out, Jesus can, right? That's my boy. So I'm going to tell Jesus, they ran out of wine. And Jesus has an interesting response. He says, woman, what does that have to do with me? My time has not yet come. Now we read this, and it sounds pretty harsh, doesn't it? Like, how is he talking to his mother like this? Now, scholars have pointed out that the term woman in Greek and in Greek culture, it doesn't carry with it the same sort of harsh, misogynistic tones that it sometimes can today. Like it's not like, woman, know your place, right? Get back in the kitchen, woman. It's not that kind of tone. It's more closely related to our, like, ma'am, right? There's respect attached to it. There's dignity and honor attached to it. But it's also, there's a level of distance attached to it. Right? If you were out in public and you didn't know a woman's name, you would probably say, excuse me, ma'am. And I know some younger women who are like, no, don't call me ma'am. I'm not a ma'am yet, right? I'll get there when I'm not a ma'am. Don't call me ma'am. But ma'am is this term of, of respect and honor that you want to show to a woman. And so there is that level, but if you were out in public with your mom, you wouldn't call her ma'am, right? You'd call her mom. And in fact, there are no other examples in Hebrew or Greek texts in this culture at any of this time where a son refers to his mother as ma'am or woman, right? This is the only place in historical evidence where this is found. And so I think what is happening here is we see a shift in the relationship between Jesus and Mary. He says, he refers to her as woman, not as a way of disrespect, but as a way to put some distance between himself and his mother, which probably would have come maybe as a bit of a shock to Mary. She did raise him, after all. He did have to submit to her parental authority as a child. The Gospels tell us that Jesus he learned obedience as a child. But now he's a fully grown man, and he's beginning his ministry. And as he begins his ministry, he will not be primarily known as the son of Mary. He will not be known as the son of Joseph, except for by people who don't really understand who he is. In his ministry, he will be identified as the Son of God. And so here we see Jesus putting a little bit of a distance between him and his mother and kind of saying, I'm no longer yours. And I've been told, I have 2 kids, the oldest is 10, but I've been told that as kids grow up, they do become adults. And at some point, you have to realize, you're always their parent and they're always your kid, but at some point, they no longer belong to you. They're their own person. They're going to do their own thing. And the kids sometimes get married. And they will belong to another more than they will belong to you. And so there has to be this natural letting go of your children as they become adults. And so I think we just see this subtle shift where it's very clear Jesus no longer just belongs to Mary. He's not Mary's son. He's God's son. And his mission will not be wrapped up in his relationship to her. It must be wrapped up in his relationship to his heavenly Father. In a sense, we find Jesus leaving his earthly father and mother as he prepares to be united to his bride, the church, us who believe. And so it seems that here, sitting at this wedding, Jesus has his own wedding in mind. Because he responds to Mary saying, "My hour has not yet come." His hour referring, of course, to his death on the cross. At the beginning of his public ministry, he already has the cross in mind because he knows that it will be through the cross that he will pay the wedding dowry to be with us all. He knows, even at the beginning, that it will be through the cross that he will be able to make an everlasting covenant with you and with me. And as John writes this, he's in tune with everything that's going on. We see the way he sprinkles some foreshadowing with his words. And John is a master at this. He's a master at weaving themes together and the way he tells a story. If you remember, the story begins by him saying, on the third day, there was a wedding. Now, for us who already know how the story goes, that phrase should transport us a little bit. On the third day, there was a wedding. The biggest third day in the Gospels is the third day after Jesus died on the cross. After the third day, there was a cosmic wedding. At the resurrection of Jesus, the wedding between God and his people, the wedding between Christ and his church began to take place on the third day. This wedding is the wedding that Jesus has in mind as he's sitting here at this wedding in Canaan. This is the wedding that we are to have in mind as the story that really becomes a living parable unfolds before us. Jesus says, "Woman, what does this have to do with me? My time has not yet come." And Mary, it seems, didn't view these words as a refusal. Right? I would have. I'd be like, okay, sorry, I'll take a step back. Never mind. But Mary didn't see Jesus' words as a refusal to act because the next thing she does, she turns to the waiters and says, "Do whatever he tells you." She's anticipating Jesus to act. And here, the funny thing is, he does act. So Mary knows him. Mary knows what's going on, and she knows Jesus is still going to act. And so, and then John gives us some details, some interesting details about what happens next as Jesus gives these instructions to these servants. And he gives us very specific details that there were these 6 kind of jars of for water for the Jewish rite of purification. And if we know anything about John, which we do, because we did a series on Revelation last year, we've been in the Gospel of John, we know that John loves to use numbers and images symbolically, right? And so when we see numbers and images, they're not there by accident. John is a master storyteller, and he is painting us a really cool picture, I think. And so he tells us that there were 6 water jars. And we know that in biblical, history and the culture, that these numbers had specific meaning, right? 7 throughout the Bible is a number of completion, right? In 7 days, God created everything, right? It was complete on 7 days. We see this in the Gospel of John, how there were all of these sevens representing kind of the 7 churches, representing the whole church, right? And so we know that 7 is a number of completeness, and 6 is the number of incompleteness. And so there were 6 jars of water for purification, and which I think we can clearly see that I think, well, actually there can be, I think, a couple of different ways we can understand this metaphor, what John is trying to get at. I think first is that we're reminded of the incompleteness of the Old Testament law. The jars of purification point us back to the Old Testament law. The people were given, and we just finished a series on Exodus, where the people were given the law, and the law was to give life and to show them how to live well, and all of these things. And the law is good, but the law was never the end of the story. The law was sort of the foundation. The law was the beginning. But even Moses tells the people, one day there will come someone greater than me. Moses calls this person the prophet. He will be greater than Moses. So already, even in Moses' generation, they're anticipating the rest of the story. The prophets of the Old Testament are anticipating the rest of the story. They talk about this one that, as Daniel refers to, as the Son of Man. They talk about the Messiah that is to come to restore people to God. And so they're waiting for this Messiah. They're waiting for this prophet that will come after them to sort of complete the story. John tells us in the first chapter, he says, we have received the law through Moses, but we have received grace and truth through Jesus Christ. We received the law through Moses, but we received grace and truth through Jesus Christ. He is the fulfillment of the story. He's the one we've been waiting for. We can also understand this incompleteness in relationship to Jesus' ministry, which makes sense because Jesus has just begun his ministry. It is not yet fulfilled yet. He's thinking about his hour that is yet to come, but it hasn't come yet. He will, in a few years, be glorified, but it hasn't happened yet. His ministry has begun, but is not complete. And as this living parable unfolds, we get sort of further glimpses of what marriage to the true groom looks like. We get a glimpse of abundance, of goodness. I mean, I think it's interesting that when Jesus tells the servants, go fill these pots of water, it says that they filled them up all the way to the brim. I mean, they leave no room at the top. These are pots they filled all the way up. They are almost overflowing. So when we're talking about the things that Jesus is providing, it's not just, I got this one bottle of $2 Chuck that we're all going to share. No, we're talking maybe close to 150 gallons of the best wine in the world. I don't know much about wine, but it's the most vintage, most expensive, the nicest wine the world has ever produced, and we got 150 gallons of it in the back, right? I mean, this is an abundance that, boggles the mind. This is the richness of what marriage to Christ looks like, and it is a gift. It is something he has just freely given. Earlier I mentioned what a disaster this would have been for the groom and his family, running out of wine at this feast, not providing the appropriate feast. It would have been a social embarrassment. It would have been financially damaging. It could have even led to litigation. This is not how you can imagine a groom on the happiest day of his life wants to start things. And here we find Jesus making a bountiful wedding gift to a couple who were evidently rather poor. Not only did he rescue them from what might have been crippling liability, but he provided an unexpected asset as they began their marriage. They get to begin this relationship with abundance and blessing. They get to have the best wine. They got to have more than enough for their whole guests and plenty more left over. This was an incredible, unexpected blessing that they got to begin their marriage with. And we also see spiritual significance for us as well, for this first sign that Jesus does in the Gospel of John points us to the truth of how Christ abundantly supplies all the needs of his people. Not just a little bit, from time to time with some bland half cans of LaCroix, but the jars are filled with the best wine to the brim. The wine was so good that the master of the feast, not knowing where it came from, he was astonished. He went to the bridegroom and says, "What have you done?" Everyone serves the good wine first, and after everyone has drank and their palates are numb now, then you put out the poor wine. But you have saved the good wine until now. You have saved the good wine until now. If we understand the story as really the living parable that it is, we know that indeed the good wine was saved until the end. Jesus' blood that became the wine of the covenant. He didn't give it at the beginning of his ministry, it was given at the end. The good wine was saved until the end, till the night that he was betrayed and he sat down with his disciples and he instilled this sacrament with them that we continue to this day. That the wine that we drink from the cup is not just water that's become wine, it is wine that has become the blood of Jesus. The price for our hand in marriage. His body, the bread given for us, not just bread that is broken, but his body that has become broken. So we could become whole. That wedding began 2,000 years ago when Jesus died and rose again. And we are still waiting for the feast, the wedding feast, to come in its fullness. We get to glimpse it now. We get to taste the wedding feast now. But there will come a day where we get to celebrate the fullness of the wedding feast in the kingdom of heaven, when it comes in its fullness. So may we enjoy it now as we look forward for the best wine yet to come. I'm going to invite Pastor Jake to come forward, and he's going to kind of walk us through communion, give us instruction, and then we will all take communion together this morning.